well know, I'm Robin Hassler-Thompson. I'm the Executive Director of the Survive and Thrive Advocacy Program. We're a nonprofit agency here in Tallahassee, Florida. We serve counties surrounding Leon County, where we are in the Big Bend of North Florida. We're part of an organization called the Big Bend Coalition Against Human Trafficking, or BBCAT. This is our local anti-trafficking coalition. It is run and supported out of our local U.S. Attorney's Office for the Northern District of Florida. Kelly Doherty, whose name and number is at the 4th bullet point here, is the person you can contact if you'd like to be part of the Big Bend effort. And if you're outside the Big Bend, I really encourage you to try to find your local coalition or task force or group that you can be part of, because networking in this field is so important. And know that too, our next meeting, we meet quarterly. They're great networking and connecting times for us. So we really always are encouraging new members. And we hope that if you're in this area, you will join us. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, I'm with STAC, or the Survive and Thrive Advocacy Center. We've been around for about 8 years, and we provide services to sex and labor trafficking survivors, whether someone is a male or female, regardless of faith affiliation, gender, gender identity. We are here for everyone, immigration status, etc. We only do this work, as I said, with our partners, our many partners in our area, locally, as well as around the state and really nation, because often we do reach out outside of the state of Florida. We do tons of community education, and we do also agency and business or workplace specific training as well. Next slide, please. We have a ton of information on our website. It is rich with information, and I'll put a link to our website in the chat later. And just know that we have toolkits. Our most recent involves youth and caregivers. I really encourage you to see that. Lots of online, but also things you can download, copy, and use. We have a lot of other things that might be of interest. And we really, thank you. Graciela Marquina, who is our community services advocate, is on. And thank you, Graciela, for posting our website link. Really encourage you to bookmark that and just go to it anytime. We post events like this. We post events around the nation that I have great confidence, and we have great confidence in terms of they're being done by really good folks who know what they're talking about. So know that our events page is always rich with information, and I know we've got a lot coming up. So check out our website. And of course, what we do is free of charge. But anyone so moved, please know on our website there is a donate button, and we always appreciate everyone's gifts and support. Next slide, please. One of the things that we've done recently is we've started a podcast. There's our QR code for it. We're about to drop our 4th podcast episode. I have the honor and opportunity to talk to survivors of human trafficking, sex and labor trafficking, about what they want us to know. So I really encourage you to take advantage of this. I will tell you, survivors who have been there are true teachers and leaders and experts. I'd also ask you, if you do know of anyone who is in that space where they are safe, where they are able to express themselves, where they're in all places want to speak about not just their experience. By the way, we rarely go into those details. We talk about what people need to know now, how we can work to help prevent trafficking. So this podcast, I think, is different from anything that you'll hear. So really encourage you to download, and just wherever you get your podcasts, on Spotify, iPhone, whatever, we're there. Next slide, please. The new thing. So excited about this. We have a call to artists, and this is, I know I saw somebody was here from Houston. We've got people from all over the country on. Know that we are having an art contest. Now this might sound weird, but we're going to create a mural with the theme of surviving to thriving, that we will be able to put on a portable canvas, if you will, and go from community to community in our area to have public functions that discuss what this mural will be conveying about the issue of trafficking. We know the way that art can talk to us, speak to our souls, is different from any other way. Words are great, video is great, but artwork can really do this. So this is our newest thing. We just launched this yesterday. We have a deadline of September 23. If you are an artist or know of an artist, we have cash prizes. So please check this out and call me. Let me know if you have any questions. We also have another program online called Stack Pro. Go to stackpro.org if you want to learn more about how human trafficking impacts the workplace and also just general basics about human trafficking. All of our third Fridays that we do, like this one, are really what we call 201 or more advanced in terms of trafficking. This Stack Pro training can help ground you and those around you on survivors, the issues of labor and sex trafficking, context. It's a real foundational piece. So regardless of if you're in a school or a bank or a hotel or in an office, this can be helpful for you. Okay, next slide, please. All right, today, I am so thrilled to have our two speakers who are about to present to you, Cristobal Perez and Sue Abulhassan, who will be here to talk about labor trafficking. Labor trafficking is so often overlooked, under-identified, and really the people who are labor trafficked are often invisible to us. And it's programs and experts like this, I think, that can help open our eyes. So I'm really thrilled. Let me tell you who they are and what they are about. So Cristobal Perez is a Deputy Director of Programs and Data for the Coalition of Independent Living Options, or CILO. He's an educational psychologist. He got his bachelor's degree in Colorado and his master's in Santiago, Chile. For over 14 years, he's supervised nonprofit social workers and provided training for healthcare providers and social services agencies, federal and local law enforcement agencies, and community associations. He works as the deputy director, as I said, for CILO, and in his position, he analyzes agency-wide programmatic data, provides oversight and management for all kinds of programs in his area there. He's also a consultant who works on subjects related to vulnerable populations and unaccompanied refugee minors and victims of sex and labor trafficking. He's a published author, academic guest lecturer, and has received local and national recognition for his work on trafficking. And Chris, it was this Friday, a year ago, that you presented on refugees and human trafficking, and it's just so great. It's like this is your month. This is the month we see Chris. So I'm so thrilled that you're here with us again today. Sue Abulhassan is the Regional Human Trafficking Coordinator for the Florida Department of Children and Families. She began her career identifying human trafficking victims among DCF's missing children back in 2003. Today, she provides expert guidance to child protective investigators and case managers and develops and implements policies, procedures, and training that assist in identifying and determining the appropriate services for human trafficking victims and survivors. She's a qualified expert in all kinds of topics: child risk assessment, contributing author on community approaches to trafficking, and has published research articles. All of this great information is on the website about Sue too. And you're a Six Sigma Green Belt certified graduate. I'm sorry, you're a Six Sigma Green Belt. You are certified as a Six Sigma Green Belt. I don't know what that is. You're going to have to tell us. And a graduate of the Florida Child Welfare Leadership Academy and the St. Thomas University of Law, John J. Brunetti Human Trafficking Academy, and others. So I will tell you, Sue is just, when we were talking to people about where to, have these experts, which we always are interested in finding the best people to speak. Sue You just came so highly recommended. I'm thrilled to be doing this with you, and I'm so glad we're here with you today. So thank you to Chris and to Sue. And you should know they've done this presentation. They are team presenters, and we're so looking forward to hearing what you have to tell us today. So let me, as you transition to putting your slides up, let me take a moment and just again say welcome and thank you so much to you. Chris, I know you're going to be, can you believe it's been a year? I mean,
unbelievable. No, and thanks so much for having me again. Really, really appreciate that, Robin.
Welcome.
It's great,
Welcome.
great.
Okay, here we go. And the boxes are minimized, Sue. They are at the top still, but no biggie. We're gonna rock and roll.
Okay, I was hoping it would disappear, but not yet, huh? Okay, sorry, I tried. Okay, well, thank you. Thank you for the great introduction for myself and for Chris.
Absolutely. Thanks so much.
It always sounds better when people read that, right? When people talk about you.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah, so this is going to be the overview of our presentation. We're going to talk about the law regarding human trafficking, TVPA, some national and Florida statistics, and then we'll talk about Florida's labor laws, some DCF data and research. We'll be a little bit specific to domestic and unaccompanied minor cases and what to look for in labor trafficking of minors. We're going to talk a little bit about forced criminality as it relates to labor trafficking, the complexity of foreign-born cases, and then a few Florida prosecuted case examples. So we're going to start off with Chris taking the lead.
Sure. Yeah, no, and Sue, actually, you know what? I want to just get a feel for the room a little bit and start with 4 questions. If you guys wouldn't mind answering some of these questions in the chat, just again, just to see where you guys are at or what your opinions on it. So the first one is, in Florida, what do you think the most common labor trafficking is for minors in particular? So I'd love to see what you guys think about that first, what your initial thought or idea is about that. So again, in Florida, what do you think the most common labor trafficking cases are for minors? Okay, agriculture, sex trafficking, agriculture. Okay, so let's keep it within the labor.
Yeah. We're not talking about sex trafficking. Oh, somebody just mentioned though, Chris, both labor and sex might come together.
Okay, agriculture and construction, street selling. Okay, fast food. Interesting. Okay, hospitality. Oh, and listen, a lot of these I'm actually going to be talking about here shortly, and I know Sue will as well. In particular, candy sales, candles. Interesting. I don't know if people have worked specific cases with that, but I'd love to hear some more about that. Street hustling, landscaping, peddling, restaurants. Okay, and I know Sue, we're going to be talking quite a bit about a lot of these with minors, cleaning and care. Okay, great. Agriculture.
So just real quick, when I open up the chat link, do you guys see that square on my screen?
We do.
Yeah, so that's why I'm not going to do that. So tell me what it says, Chris.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure.
Reading the chat out to you.
Okay, so right now it says for rent, house cleaning services. Okay, great. We're getting a general idea, massage therapy and agriculture. Okay, great. Now the same goes for adults. I'm trying to see if you guys think that there might be a difference between adults and minors. So in this case, maid services, I just read there. So in Florida, what do you think the most common labor trafficking cases are specifically for adults? Okay, great. So massage, landscaping, hospitality, construction or landscaping, construction, agriculture, domestic services, laundry, agriculture.
Restaurant, food, hospitality, a lot of the same ones, Chris.
Yeah. Okay, so you guys are thinking that the industries are similar then nanny, family care, construction, cleaning, domestic, drug mules, okay, hotel and food service. Same for youth. So, okay.
Factory workers.
Factory, okay.
And remembering we've got, even though we're focusing on Florida, we do have people from all over the country here.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's a great point. Okay, now a second distinction that we're looking to make here is the most common cases for U.S. citizens for labor in particular. What do you guys, is there a different industry that you guys are thinking is specific? And again, this is for all U.S. citizens and labor. Do you guys think there are common types of cases for U.S. citizens? Construction? restaurant, domestic work, okay, roofing, hospitality, agriculture, massage, drug trade, okay, food industry, traveling sales, beauty industry, domestic construction, fields, domestic restaurant, okay.
Wide encompassing, somebody said too.
Wide encompassing, I might have missed that one, sorry.
Yeah. No, yes, that's why we are.
Yeah. No, you know what, and actually, oh, I forgot nail salons for adult immigrants. Great, actually, and you know what, that was the fourth question about the types of cases specifically for the foreign born. But it sounds like that there's common theme of the same types of industries that you guys are seeing. So soon, they're very creative and getting the most out of those in bondage. Absolutely. Yep. And we'll see the entertainment as well. Yep, you're right. So great. Okay, thanks for your feedback. And you know, if there are some in particular that you guys are interested in looking at or talking a little more about, please let us know. We have a general structure as to those that we're going to be the types of cases that we're talking about. But if there are some in particular that you'd like to go over, you know, please just let us know. Okay, so agriculture there as well. Okay, so now I'm going to go straight into the presentation, and I'm going to try to be as short as possible. And I know Sue knows that I kind of ramble a little bit sometimes, so I'm trying to be very, very smart with the time frames here. So bear with me, all right? But so okay, so just to start out with how we currently define human trafficking started in the year 2000, both at an international and at a national level. The Palermo Protocol of 2000. And the Victims of Trafficking Protections of 2000, that's in the US. The TVPA, as we'll address it, I guess, moving forward in the presentation, has some differences, though, with the Palermo Protocol. For example, the TVPA doesn't consider organ trafficking as human trafficking. And something else that's important to highlight here is that the TVPA has also been reauthorized multiple times, and each time addressing nuances that the law needed to consider. So, for example, the first time that U.S. citizens were included in the law was in 2005, and crime penalties might have changed, or the prevention might have been updated in these. Also in 2013, the TVPRA, when it's reauthorized, it goes by the TVPRA. It established and strengthened some programs to ensure that U.S. citizens don't purchase products made by victims of trafficking, and to prevent child marriage. And also, you know, I have listed here the P's here, and that's what initially the TVPA looked to address in human trafficking. That included the protection, prosecution, and prevention. However, in 2009, they added a fourth P, which was partnership, because it seemed like that it was the most effective way of working trafficking cases. That was through partnership and collaboration. Sue, if you don't mind going to the next slide. Okay, so the TVPA is at the base of all understandings of what human trafficking is in the United States. It's the federal definition, and many states have also based their definition off of it. And the law covers really the entire process of what trafficking is, whether it's sex or labor. Both sex and labor include the recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, or obtaining of a person. And both include concepts of force, fraud, or coercion as key elements when identifying cases. The two main differences between sex and labor are A, the age component. You don't have to show force, fraud, or coercion in sex trafficking if you're a minor. And B, in one of the reauthorizations of the law, it included the patronizing and soliciting of a person as part of the process for sex trafficking in particular. Labor trafficking also highlights concepts like involuntary servitude, peonage, debt bondage, or slavery terminology that isn't included in the sex part, as you can see here in the presentation. But not to get too much into this, but it's important to understand the differences between the federal and state laws. In this case, since we're talking about Florida, we wanted to highlight that coercion is not required to be present in labor trafficking cases for minors in particular. So again, unfortunately, for time purposes, I won't delve too much into that, but it's important to understand those differences. So, okay. Now we're going to talk about a quick summary of or since we've talked about a quick summary of that, I wanted to talk about what the TVPA also addresses. In this case, I wanted to start out with what talking about the TIP report itself. So the TIP report is an annual document that's submitted to Congress that talks about how different countries, including the United States, are doing with anti-trafficking efforts. So and they highlight different angles, different aspects of it, and that are important to check out. So, and they normally are released in June or July. So I wanted to talk about real quick about the one that just came out a few months ago. So they highlighted certain components here. I talked about the technology partnership coalitions that I'll just highlight real quick because I thought it was very interesting. In particular, I found that it's important for us to know how technology maybe is impacting labor trafficking cases. And so in this case, one that I wanted to highlight in particular was one that they talked about, that's partnership for monitoring and eliminating forced labor in supply chains and enhancing worker protections for governments. This is to learn and replicate different tech applications and partnerships in both private and civil sector. In addition to that, it also talks, or they talk about one of the partnerships, I believe it's called the let me see here. It's the Polaris and PayPal initiative that, it's called the Financial Intelligence Unit. And that's for monitoring money laundering, banking, and that sort of stuff. So again, I think it's really important for us to talk about that and to learn about what's going on. If you're interested in that, again, please check out the TIP report and see what's going on. In addition to that, they share data, and in this case, it talks about certain data that the Department of Justice anti-trafficking grantees have collected, and they shared a subset, right, of that data, and they reported that over 16,000 cases were opened in that in this subset of cases that was between July 2021 and June 2022, and of these cases, 63% were U.S. citizens or lawful permanent residents, and 31% were foreign nationals. So, and then the remaining, which were 6%, were unknown. And then the grantees also reported that 62% were victims of sex, 21% were labor, and 8% were identified as both sex and labor, and then 9% were actually not specified. So that's again what the TIP report is telling us right now, and something that I'll get into here. Sue, if you don't mind going to the next slide, something that I wanted to talk about specifically about these statistics and whatnot. So not to get oversaturated with images over here, but just to explain what this is about. So as many of you guys might know, there is no center agency that stores all the statistics for trafficking. And while we know that the TIP report can give us annual numbers, we don't have a place that shares everything related to trafficking stats, and let alone for labor trafficking. So with that in mind, throughout the past years, we've been compiling stats and different sources of general, so we can have a general idea of labor trafficking and what we can learn, right? So here we have an overview of the data that we'll be sharing. And again, I'm a very visual person, so this timeline kind of helps me out. And to start out with, we're going to be talking about at the federal level, so national stats, starting with victim services from two angles, from the Trafficking Victims Assistance Projects, or TVAP programs, as well as the Office for Victims of Crime Trafficking Task Force, the Office for Victims of Crime Task Force data that shows specifically to the Enhanced Collaborative Models, or ECM. That's represented from 2018 to 2020. Then certification and eligibility letters data from 2001 through 2018. Federal prosecutions from the year 2000 all the way through 2020. And lastly, Polaris data from 2018 through 2020. Again, all this is really nuanced because we have to understand that we have to put it all together, right? So we have to know and remember what we're seeing and how it might impact it, right? So
and a lot of this overlaps too.
Absolutely,
right?
yes, yeah, and also, yeah, we'll go straight into it here. But at a Florida level, we do know that we're talking specifically about DCF numbers as well as Polaris. So we'll go into that one. Perfect. So thanks, Sue. As stated, we were talking about TVAP first, right? So they reported that, or they put out a report that between 2012 and 2018, nationwide, they served 62% female cases. 72% of them were actually labor trafficking cases, and over 90% of them were adults. So again, this is what TVAP is seeing, right? So as I said earlier, you know, you have to note that there are different points of data, and how we since we don't have that centralized resource, we need to know what we might be missing, that there might be gaps. And the gap in this case, for example, is that TVAP might not include minor cases that are being served per state. So as Sue knows, for example, DCF cases won't likely be served under TVAP. So unless it's a very specific scenario that might take place, but so those numbers wouldn't be captured. So with that in mind, we need to look at some more stuff. So next one, perfect. So now I'm going to talk about the OVC, the enhanced or the ECM grants. So I know that that many of you might have OVC funding that are on this call. So if you applied, but again, to be transparent with this data source, I don't want to say this is all OVC partners, but in this case, it's specific to ECM. Then that's only 21% of the agencies funded through OVC. So please keep that in mind when we're going over this nationwide. So the next step or next page, please. Perfect. Okay. So what OVC, the ECM task force data collects is that they show us, or what they've been able to tell us, is that through federal fiscal year 19 through 20, there were over 5,000 investigations that were initiated in that time frame. And of those, mainly focusing on labor here, only 281 of those, or 5%, were focused on labor. And an additional 223, or 4%, were sex and labor. So through those investigations, we know that there are over 2,300 potential labor cases, and additional 363 sex and labor cases that could be identified. So, and thanks to those investigations, okay, yeah, I'll break down. Go ahead, sir.
Sorry, you want me to go back?
Yeah, if you don't mind, just to talk real quick about one of those. So yeah, so in that case, 24 cases had arrests, 51 sex and labor, also brought arrests of 9 labor trafficking cases, and that those secured plea bargains or guilty pleas. So these again are numbers really interesting because we compare a lot to to sex trafficking, and it's very clear when you see this type of data. So let's go to this right here. Okay, if you don't mind pressing this one a few times here, then we'll go over that. Perfect, yeah, because I'm going to try to be quick to talk about all of it at once, if you don't mind, Sue. Keep on pressing it if you don't mind. Okay, so I'll go talking about it while you're going. So now I'm going to talk about some of the certification eligibility letter data. So for those of you that don't know, the foreign-born, let's go back. Yeah, great. So the foreign-born victims that are considered both victims of trafficking, sex and labor, receive a letter. Adults receive a certification letter, and minors receive something called an eligibility letter. This gives them benefits as refugees in the United States. So in other words, that would be, say, Medicaid, food stamps, cash assistance, and to the same degree that a refugee would. And I'm not going to go into the full details of it, but that's really what it looks like. And in this case, we have 20 years of data based on both certain eligibility letters. And we know that the top 5 states in which they received certification letters in particular are California, New York, Texas, Florida, and actually DC. And we know that the most common countries in which people have been coming from, if you want to look at trends and whatnot, we have a list there. So like Mexico, Philippines, Thailand, those top 3. If you want to check out some more, please, look at the list there. And we also know that in 20 years, 65% of the certification letters were awarded to victims of labor trafficking, and that 64% of them have been female. So again, in this case with the foreign-born, you have more labor, at least with the cert letters, right? So let's go down here to the next one, if you don't mind, Sue. Next slide. Yeah. Okay, great. So here's a breakdown of what we saw. Like I just gave you guys a general idea of 20 years worth of certain eligibility letters. But here's something that we see for fiscal year 21 in particular, and certain aspects to highlight is that it's clear that there were more eligibility letters issued in that time frame when you compare 2000 over 2000 to over 500, right? And increasingly or interestingly enough, I'd say that the T visas were the most common method of cert letters versus continued presence. And I say that's interesting because to get a T visa, it's not the fastest of steps to do so. Again, that's I found interesting. And in terms of those who get cert letters, again, in tune with what we saw in 20 years, 68% were labor trafficking cases, and 61 were female. And as I said, that goes in line with 20 years. And when it comes to the eligibility letters, 69% were also labor. And in this case, though, there were more males that were getting these letters. So let's go to this next one, so if you don't mind. Perfect, great. So now I'm going to start talking, or I'm going to share some interesting data about labor trafficking prosecutions at a federal level. Please note federal, not state. I comment that I generally get is why do we not see more labor prosecutions, right? And we'll try to get into that a little bit. And this actual report was going to give us quite a bit of insight into it. And so, as you can see, there's been clearly more sex trafficking cases prosecuted in the last 20 years, right? Or since the passing of the TVPA. In fact, there were more sex trafficking cases in 2020 alone than in all of the 20 years of labor cases that were prosecuted, if you combine them all, if they're collected all together. So if you start looking at the numbers or what was analyzed, it included over 4,800 victims, a majority of which were minors. And close to 1,500 prosecutors, as you can see, and 91% were sex trafficking, only 9% were forced labor. So again, it's important to see this as data points, right? So in terms of age, right, of who were prosecuted or who was included in these prosecutions, those that were victimized, in particular for the adults, you can see that those that were victimized in forced labor, when compared, that there were more when it comes to, when it comes to the age of it, you can see that there were more, sorry, I'm having my screen's freezing here, just reading it properly. So there were more adults when it comes to the labor cases. Clearly, you can see that there's a distinction when it comes to forced labor and sex trafficking in age. When it comes to gender, there's also a pretty big difference with males and females in both sex and labor trafficking. And when it comes to the nationality, while there were more US citizens that were prosecuted, if you look at the forced labor cases, you can see that a majority of them were foreign-born victims. If you don't mind, soon, let's go to the next one. So, okay. This slide in particular is really fascinating to me because it talks about vulnerabilities, right? And again, focusing on labor trafficking, the pre-existing factors that they found, including labor barrier, intellectual disability, homelessness, runaway, home, and undocumented status being as the main forms of vulnerabilities. Interestingly enough, the last three, homelessness, runaway, and undocumented status, were also found to be pre-existing vulnerabilities in sex trafficking. So again, when it comes to identification and seeing what the most important components are, when you're trying to work these cases, that's something to keep in mind. So we do know also, if you don't mind, Sue, let's go to the next one. Yeah, these are actually cases that, oh, sorry, Sue, I forgot that we had that. Okay, so these are, if you guys do want to learn some more about these cases in particular and the different types of situations that you want to learn about, you have with victims with disabilities, irregular immigration status, minor victims, and language barriers. So, you know, if you want to learn some more about them, those are some examples. So let's go to the next one. Perfect. So in terms of the recruitment, this report shared that the Southeast region between 2015 and 2020 had yeah, they could compile what it really looked like, right? So in this case, they saw that the pre-existing relationships followed by fraudulent job offers, then unknown, and the promise of a better education were some of the recruitment methods with these cases. Perfect. So, okay. So the report also talks about the methods of coercion of these cases. And here I've specifically highlighted forced labor and what they found in 2020. The most common of methods of coercion was withholding of pay, followed by physical abuse, threats of physical abuse, physical isolation, and lastly, verbal and emotional abuse. And, please note that these aren't mutually exclusive. So cases might have had multiple methods of coercion. And as you can see here, something that is important to highlight is that 70% of them were non-physical methods of coercion. Okay, so this is the last set of these data sets for the prosecutions, and it's regarding the industries that are associated with prosecutions, right? So nationwide, the most common industry was domestic work, followed by restaurants, agriculture, beauty salons, construction, and you see the list there. If you're interested in what the other components are, it was, I believe, door-to-door sales and panhandling, that's if I remember the report correctly. And since there have been so few cases that were prosecuted in Florida within this time frame, they actually had to group Florida and other states, and they called it the Southeast region. I just mentioned it a few minutes ago, but if you're interested in knowing what those states included, it's highlighted here in the slide, and it's Louisiana, Mississippi, Tennessee, Alabama, Georgia, and Florida. And in this region between 2015 and 2020, domestic work was also at the top of the list. However, agriculture came in second over restaurants and food industry, and strip clubs and others, strip clubs and unknown as well. So let's go to this next one. Perfect. Okay. So now I'm going to talk really quickly about Polaris, which collects data as the National Human Trafficking Hotline. And as a note here, please, know that these aren't actually cases. They're calls that were made into the hotline that are screening calls about potential cases. So Polaris tells us that between 2018 and 2020, this is again at a national level, that close to 16,000 victims were identified as labor trafficking victims, and 92% of those of those identified whose nationality was known were foreign-born victims. And this is really interesting as well, that many people are under the impression that all foreign-born cases are undocumented, but the data shows us that 72% of the victims, again, that were called into Polaris or to the hotline actually had a visa to work in the United States. And actually, Sue, if you don't mind, there's something that pops up here. There we go. Okay, so if you don't know the types of visas that are listed here, it's kind of a little bit of a cheat sheet there. So the H-2A is specific; it's a visa for agriculture. H-2B is for non-agricultural work. The J-1 is for cultural and educational exchange, and lastly, the H-3 or the G-5s, which is for diplomatic and international organization employees. So again, 72% had those working visas potentially. So in addition to that, what Polaris does tell us is that with this data is that a majority of them in this time frame were from Mexico and male. And again, please note that a large percentage of those that had called, didn't include the potential victim's nationality or whether they were male or female. So that wasn't included in this data. So there are parts that are missing. But from that's known, this is what we're able to report. And Polaris also states that in this period, agricultural cases were clearly the most common, and followed by landscaping, construction, hospitality, and forestry or reforestation. Again, a lot of these that you guys might have mentioned in the call, in the initial questions that we made. So Sue, I'm going to pass it on to you right now if I remember this correctly.
Well, thank you, Chris.
For sure.
Before you start, Sue, there was a quick question that came in on the data. When you say domestic, and this was in the question, does that include hospitality, housekeeping, or is that just in people's homes, personal, like in people's individual homes?
Normally, when you're looking at data, they do make that distinction between domestic work is normally somebody that is working individually at home, and hospitality is normally at a different work. If that's the question, did I get that right? Yeah.
So hotel housekeeping would be under hospitality.
That would be correct. Yeah, that's normally how the data is split up. That's generally what it's looked at.
Very good. Thank you.
For sure.
Okay, so we're going to look at some Florida-specific data and cases, and start off with what Polaris knows about Florida. So in 2022, Polaris data for the first 6 months, we're calling it semester 1, January to June, and then semester 2, July through December. The red one is in the first 6 months. You can see the areas of Florida where Polaris received their tip calls to. Remember, these are calls into Polaris and not verified cases. We don't have data on all the cases that are called into them if they're verified or not. But you can see some of the stronger areas. Obviously, Miami-Dade, Hillsborough, Broward are some of the 3 larger counties with reports through the tip hotline.
And Sue, can I add something, 2 quick seconds
Sure.
for that one? So something that's very important to note is that you had people from Brazil, Colombia, Italy, India, South Africa. The youngest that was called in was 4 and the oldest was 73. So you have all types of different ages, nationalities of those that were called in. So sorry, Sue, just one.
Right. Thank you. And so the type of industries that they're called in reports at, and Chris already touched on that a little bit, but the top 3 that are called into the Polaris hotline for labor is agricultural work, domestic work, and traveling sales crews. And then the ones that are combined, sex and labor, illicit massage, health and beauty, hotel, motel-based, and resident-based commercial sex. So this is specific to Florida. And every time a report is made to the Polaris hotline on a minor allegedly in Florida, then that report is made to our abuse hotline. So Polaris actually sends a report directly to our abuse hotline, and an abuse report is generated with that information. So we're going to talk about what we know here. So in Florida, as you know, there are labor standards, and there's also federal labor standards. So we have to follow federal, and then Florida can add on top of that. And what people need to realize, a child under the age of 14 may not work at all. 14 to 15 can work up to 15 hours per week when school is in session. They can only work 3 hours a day if school is in session the next day as well. And children under 15 must be supervised within eyesight. So we see these labor laws broken a lot. What we didn't include in here, and maybe Chris, you might want to talk about it a little later, the clear difference between, labor trafficking, labor exploitation is a little bit different, right? We have child labor, labor exploitation, labor trafficking, and there's a very fine difference between those, and it gets confusing. But there are labor laws, and when they're not practicing the labor laws, and we definitely have labor exploitation there. And then when there's forced fraud in Florida with minors, then we have the labor trafficking as well. So if you're not familiar with your labor laws, please look them up, because that's really going to help you as well.
And Sue, just to note there, to add to what you're saying, they're both federal and state laws that are really important to keep in mind. So go ahead.
Right. And another thing to realize too, that you have to have a Florida work permit when you're employing a minor in the entertainment industry. A lot of times I know at DCF, we get reports on children working, in shows or modeling or whatever it might be. Well, that company, if it's a legal company, still doesn't mean they're not exploiting the child. They could be. They need to have a work permit for that child to be able to work. And we're not seeing that at all very much, but it's good to know that it is required by law. And looking at our hotline numbers, right? So DCF added the human trafficking maltreatment back in 2009. We added in 2012, we separated it out to labor and sex trafficking. But last year in 2022, you can see that there was 1,595 reports called in on unique IDs. And we use that term to represent each child one time, because as you know how the hotline works, you often get multiple reports on the same child. So this is representing a child one time and reports made to the hotline. And that is for sex and labor, that total there. But we can show you the difference here. So Remember, there was 1,595 unique IDs, which created 1,811 reports, and only 9% were for labor. And we know that's been consistent for a while. We know it's underreported. And again, the majority are females. Males are underreported as well in both labor and sex trafficking. We're seeing that as well. But it's important to know that over an average, around 25% of the reports are verified. And another 25% usually is not substantiated. Last year, this is a little bit different. It's a little bit lower on verification, but that's the average for the past several years. So this kind of breaks it out to regions. So you remember seeing Polaris's numbers per counties when Miami-Dade was high, Hillsborough and Broward. Here you can look that our highest intake for human trafficking, and this includes both, we don't have it broken down between labor and sex, is in the central region and then the Suncoast region. Again, those are larger regions, while Miami-Dade, southern region is only 2 counties there, but you can kind of see where the reports are divided up at. Remind me, Chris, to change that to only labor next time.
Definitely, will do.
So here we have initial cases, 2022, 170, like we said, were for labor, again, which is what we're seeing with federal data and all the data. The highest percentage is male on the minor cases. So there are 94 males, 69 females, and 4 unknown. And with the verified cases, it was a total of 22 minors from those cases. And the industries we were verifying at with our DCF data were in food industry, electrical work, unknown, and construction. Again, 73% were males with our cases on labor. And here it shows you where it's broken down, where the verified cases were last year per county. Again, Miami-Dade is there again, Hillsborough and Broward were the higher counties there as well. So RTI took all of our data one time from like 2000, I think it was 2009 to 2014, if I'm not mistaken, but for like, oh, here it is, sorry, 2013 to 2017. They looked at all of our data, our intakes at the hotline, and they pulled out 558 labor trafficking allegations from that data. An average, again, it was 9% of all trafficking allegations. We consistently see that throughout the years. And compared to allegations of sex trafficking, it was disproportionately in the central region, if you want to look at it compared to all the other allegations. And they're more likely to be substantiated, meaning verified, or to be unfounded. So we didn't have that middle gray area as much with the labor trafficking cases like we see in the sex trafficking cases, that not substantiated, not sure what's going on area. With labor trafficking, we're seeing it more like it's definitely going on, or there's nothing to it. It's more like what we were seeing. The type of reports that we received at the hotline are the agricultural work, the farm, the traveling sales crews, servitude, forced employment, and forced illegal activities. So going back to the area in the state where we had more verified cases being in the central region, Orange County, that was because of the traveling sales crews. We're getting a little bit more away from that, and I'll explain more about that when we get to the slide about traveling sales crews. They've kind of upped their game. So, but we used to get quite a few reports for the traveling sales crews. And the victims were seeing domestic-born children, undocumented children, unaccompanied children, and then the runaway and homeless youth population as well. So really a little bit of everything. But the traveling sales crews are mostly domestic children that we're seeing. And if you've seen them, and I think someone mentioned that earlier when you asked the question, selling candles and candies out of tubs, right? That's what you see them going door to door or going out and on the street and in front of certain stores or convenience stores or gas stations, and they're trying to sell things out of tubs. And they say they're working for a nonprofit charity, and it's a good, entrepreneurship type of program, keeping them off the streets, keeping them out of trouble. They used to call themselves like Teens Against Drugs and Alcohol or awareness teams. They have all these different names out there that they've been using to make it sound like they're really legit. When in actuality, they really are exploiting these kids over and over for labor. And like within our DCF reports, you're going to have 2 types of families that are going to be involved. You're going to have the family that once they learn that what's going on, they never let that child go back or and be within that organization or work for that organization. Then you have the family who really don't care if the child's out of their hair, if the child's making their own money, or if the child can come home and pay for their next set of crack. They don't listen to what you're telling them about their organization. So we see some repeated players in that. Then we see families that never let their child go back. But we've seen cases, and the hazards have included obviously unsafe transportation, inadequate supervision. Remember, at the age of 15, they must be supervised with an eyesight. These are kids as young as 8, 9 years old going door to door selling things. We've had cases where children have fainted in the middle of the street because they're dehydrated. They don't know the neighborhood they're in. They don't know who's coming to their rescue. One time a child was knocking on someone's door, and the lady said next door is a registered sexual predator. And she called her leader, and the leader said, just cross the street and keep working. So they're at extreme risk. They're exposed to assault. We've had children who've knocked on doors and the person's opened the door and slapped them in the face, told them to go away. Abandonment. We've had cases where they tend to follow a lot of sporting events and the Super Bowls. They do the tailgating a lot. And when a child doesn't want to work anymore, he's tired, then sometimes he gets abandoned. So we had a child that was abandoned at a Walmart in Texas. He was from Orlando, Florida, because he didn't want to work anymore. He was tired. And of course, they called their local hotline, which ended up coming back to Florida because the child was from Florida. We've had a child who was actually assaulted and arrested at gunpoint in a bathroom at one of these tailgating parties by another group doing the same type of work. And he was 14 years old. So there's a lot of issues with that. Every time we get involved with these groups, they tend to up their game. We used to work very hand in hand with the Department of Professional Regulations because obviously they're employing teens and they're breaking all the labor laws, and they have been fined several times, but it's civil penalties. So what do? They go on Sunbiz and create a new name of a corporation and abandon the other one. So it goes to collections and nothing ever gets paid. So there's no lessons learned. So now they have taught their kids to say that they're volunteering with them. They're not employed. But when you take them and separate them apart, they do say they get money at the end of the week, but they don't know how much money they're going to get, is what they're told to say, that they're given donations by the organization at the end of the week. So that kind of is keeping them away a little bit more from the labor laws. So they're just exploiting everything in every way with that. And we tend to get less reports on them more recently because of that. They're a little bit more under the radar. They also notify their local police stations to say that they're going to be in their area soliciting. And so they flashed that letter where they sent to the police station to people when they question them, making it look like it's more legitimate, even though, the police station doesn't respond and say, yes, you can come and solicit in my neighborhood. Oh, this is the old video. So several years ago, we actually thought we were making progress with this. Again, there's been a lot more education since then. So I would think judges would know a lot more. But at the time when this person was arrested and his leader, they were charged with 24 counts of human trafficking because that's how many minors they had out working in the streets. But the judge that they appeared in front of during the regular work week, because it was a weekend, and so the weekend judge charged them with all of these things. And then when they appeared in front of the actual circuit judge, he minimized all of those charges and ended up charging him, I think, for contributing to a minor of a delinquency of a minor. So there was a lot of education to do with judges on this as well, but I'll play this.
Hey, Sue, just a quick thing. I think somebody raised their hand. I don't know if I'm seeing this right because I have a problem with my internet a little bit, but Robin, is that right?
We have a couple of questions, but I've been monitoring them and we'll be saving them and getting to them in a little bit.
Okay, thanks a lot, Robin.
Sure.
Thank you. I can't see anything, sorry.
Channel 9 Eyewitness News continues right now at 6 with Bob Upsall, Marty Salt, and Chief Meteorologist Tom Terry.
We have some major news right now in the fight against child exploitation. Palm Bay police say they've arrested 2 men accused of using young children as salesmen for fake charities.
We told you earlier this month how DCF received complaints that some of the children were being mistreated. Channel 9's Jeff Deal is live in Palm Bay now. And Jeff, for the first time, these men are facing human trafficking charges.
And for DCF, this is a big deal. Investigators tell us this group has been fined for violating child labor laws in the past, and one of these guys has been arrested in an operation like this before, but this is the first time the human trafficking charge has been applied. You see the name on the van, Teens Against Drugs and Alcohol. The group bills itself as a charitable organization, but DCF investigators say charity is the last thing on the organizers' minds.
The leaders of these groups are doing it just for the exploitation to gain money. They're not concerned really about the safety of the children.
Today, two men, Johnny Carrasquillo and John St. Hilar, appeared before a judge on human trafficking and child abuse charges. Investigators say on Friday they used the van with plywood seats, no seatbelts, and no easy way out to drop off 24 children from Orange County into this Palm Bay neighborhood.
Kids were telling me they have splinters either in their butt or in their hands from sitting there.
The children walked the neighborhood selling candy and trinkets. Teens told police that they would get picked up in these vans around 9 o'clock in the morning and wouldn't get home until midnight. Eyewitness News has been looking at Teens Against Drugs and Alcohol since the 1990s.
It's called Teens Against Drugs and Alcohol.
And DCF launched an investigation into this group and others a few years ago after getting complaints about abuse.
We've had kids faint. We've had situations where the kids have been beaten up.
But this is the first time human trafficking laws have been applied anywhere in Florida to put guys like these behind bars. And the children told police they were not even picked up for restroom breaks, that they were told to either use the bushes or ask a neighbor if they could use their restroom. The men are each being held at the Brevard County Jail here on a $5 million bond. Reporting live at the jail in Brevard County, Jeff Deal, Channel 9 Eyewitness News.
Okay, I could go on talking about them for a long time, but for the sake of time, I'll go on and we'll take questions at the end. I also wanted to share this as a domestic case. We don't have time to watch it. It's a TED Talk. I think Robin's going to share the link for it if you ever have time to watch it. But it's a child whose parents, how he reports it on TED Talk, because I don't have any personal knowledge of him. But he said his parents joined this religious cult. And he was sent at the age of 12 years old to work, to live with this organization and work for them. And he was exploited for years. And he talks about the physical abuse, the torture, the whole forced fraud incursion about it, how it happens right here. And so I was trying to research a little bit more about him. And I found where another person was also exploited by this, which I believe is the same organization, because he doesn't name it on TED Talk, but she names it as the United Nations of Islam, which was a Black American religious movement based in Kansas City, Kansas. And that's where he said he was sent to, Kansas City, Kansas. It was founded in 1978, an offshoot of the Nation of Islam, and continues, it's currently known as Value Creators. And I'm saying that because there was another person who had the same experience that he talks about, who actually filed a lawsuit. Her name was Kendra Ross, and she was awarded $8 million for being a victim of human trafficking by this group. So I'm sure there's a lot more out there, but that's interesting how it was through a religious cult, I guess, that they got all tied into that, and how the parents did not know. They weren't allowed to talk freely to their parents. He talks about that in his TED Talk. The conversations were listened to, and there would be reprimands if they said anything they weren't supposed to say.
And if you're not looking at the chat, please know that I did just drop that link into the chat so you can watch that video later. And Sue, let me tell you, somebody, Lori just said in the chat too, she ran into that. I guess it's that Teens Against Drugs and Alcohol group back in 2019, 2020. Police told, didn't recognize it as trafficking. And it kind of shows that we are working hard to try to do better, but not always will people understand that this is trafficking, right?
Yeah, and what's really important about them is that they have really upped their game. So they really know how to disguise it more and more, because every time we get involved, they like counter what we say. And so they even have a website, and they look like they're best friends with law enforcement. So when they're at a gas station and law enforcement comes up for gas or is in the parking lot, they'll go up and pose with them and take a picture. What law enforcement officer wouldn't take a picture with a kid who wants to take their picture, right? Well, they take that and they post it on their website. So they look like they're being supported by, all these great agencies, that they're really a great agency. In actuality, and going back to that video with Palm Beach with the officer there, his name is Chris, they had logs inside that van that showed that they make over $150,000 a year in the solicitation, right? Each kid and how much money he produced, because technically they're supposed to pay them $2 per item they sell. And there's also, they have it where they encourage the kids to sell more, because then they get to sit in the front seats as opposed in the back, or they get to go with them to Fun Spot or some nice place. They get to go with them, but they still have to pay their entrance fee, but you have to earn the right to go. So it's just really crazy how they really have it disguised.
They're very clever. They're very manipulative. They work
Yes.
the angles. And somebody's asking too, were they convicted? Did they get any punishment?
The only Johnny Carrasquillo is the guy's name, who was the leader, and he only ended up getting 1 year probation for contributing to the delinquency of a minor, not for trafficking. And he got off early release from his probation. That same month, we got a report. They're back in operation, because part of his probation is no contact with minors, except his own biological children. So not much came out of that. It was short-lived, but again, that was back in 2012, 2013, I think he got off. And, we have educated judges and, state attorney's office a lot more on this subject, but they've upped their game as well. And so they're not coming under the attention of reporters as much.
And the other part about this too, and just to kind of dispel one of those myths and take just a moment, these vans that go around, they're not snatching kids up off of the street. They are grooming them and convincing them, right? They're manipulative.
And it's by word of mouth and friends, right? And they have ads. They used to post signs like near the school bus stop. On a tree, you'll see a sign, teens who can earn money. What teen can earn money at 14? I mean, it's really, the vulnerability is much more about money, as opposed to in sex trafficking, we have several vulnerabilities. This is more about the child wanting to make money and think he's making money, and looking for a job type of thing. So we have these vans, we've had these vans go to parent pickup line in schools and pick up these kids. And it's usually middle school kids. And it's word of mouth that they get more people, involved.
There you go. Okay. All right. Thanks.
So now the other type of reports we receive at our hotline are on undocumented children. And undocumented kids are kids who enter the United States unaccompanied, and sometimes with an adult. And so a few years back, and Chris, you might remember when this went into effect, but they kind of changed the border rules. So if you come in as a child to the borders, the southwest borders of the United States, through Texas, California, whatever you're coming in, if you're with an adult, then that adult also can seek protection, right? They can apply for asylum or refugee status. If you're adult, just an adult without a child, then you get sent back, usually. It's rare that you get allowed to go through the process of applying for that. So we were having cases where kids were being technically sold to an adult to cross the border with. So there's really no biological relation between them, or no, they might have known, and the parents might have, known them at one point, but we've seen a lot of that come in. And so when that happens, when there's really not a relationship between the child, that child's the one that's getting abandoned. It's going to be much more vulnerable than just the regular vulnerabilities that an undocumented child will have. And so when that child is being processed through ORR, Office of Refugee Resettlement, then they try to find them a sponsor to live with. And so there's really not a lot of qualifications to becoming a sponsor. You mostly just have to say, yes, I'll take the child. But you also are supposed to follow the agreement, which is put the child in school, don't have the child working, to take care of the child like you would it's your own child. So we see those cases where these kids are placed with sponsor. The sponsor says they're going to do that. But then in the end, the sponsors really wants to exploit that child. They want the child to go to work, give them money, pay for rent. Sometimes you'll see these kids living in a house with 10 other people, majority of them adults, and they work in shifts. The child does not go to school, is not enrolled in school. So we have a lot of situations like that happening. And then, of course, if that child ends up being hurt while they're working the fields or whatever they're working, end up in the emergency room, that's kind of how we get notified, because there's a child there without anyone to pick them up. Or they get in a fight with their sponsor because they don't want to go to work that day. We've got reports of that where law enforcement is called out because there's been a fight. And then it ends up the sponsor disappears and law enforcement brings the child to the Jack Center or whatever it is. And so that's how we're being notified of those type of cases. Now, There are many good sponsors out there. I don't want to say every sponsor is doing this, but quite a few of them, their only purpose of sponsoring the child is to exploit that child. And usually it's labor trafficking. Sometimes it's both, but usually what we're seeing is labor trafficking. So some of the cases we see is where the kids are working 8 to 10 hours a day, 7 days in fields. And a lot of times the uncle has obtained fraudulent IDs for them. And so they're keeping all the earnings. The child sees nothing. Parents' whereabouts are unknown. And unfortunately, these kids come here, they want to stay here, they think they're bettering their life, and then they get exploited. Then they're in a situation, they owe a debt back home, and so they don't know what to do. It's really, really sad. So the unaccompanied minors, the ORR definition are children that have no lawful immigration status in the United States, have not attained 18 years of age. There is no parent or legal guardian in the United States or no parent or legal guardian in the US available to provide physical custody. And the majority come from the Northern Triangle. Majority are 15 years old or older. And the majority are males. So Chris, did you want to add anything to that? I know that was originally one of your slides.
Yeah, no, listen, I think it's just important that people understand when you're talking about unaccompanied minors, how it's properly defined, and that we all need to understand that, like, what the parameters are of what the U.S. government considers an unaccompanied minor, so that there isn't any confusion with that.
Right. And this is where.
If you want, I can go on.
Yeah, go ahead, do this one as well.
Sure. Yeah, no, because Sue, I think you did a great job of talking a lot about some of the concepts that are going to be coming up here in the next slide, or the upcoming slides, to understand kind of the general context, right? But in this slide, we wanted to highlight how the group really kind of is vulnerable in 3 different stages, right? Unaccompanied minors. And in this one in the home country, that includes, gang recruitment, community violence, abusive homes, poverty, and lack of employment opportunities. So they're trying to escape that type of scenario. And then those are vulnerabilities that can lead to trafficking, and that's going to lead them to other, if they want to leave that area, to what we consider a transit area. And that is when they're coming to the United States. And it's like that arrow there that's in the map, and where they're trying to go unidentified through the journey, right? And so in this case, we're trying to see, I don't know if, do you want me to answer that right now, Robin? Or do you want, let's hold off on the questions, right?
Yeah, let's hold off for just now. Yeah.
Sounds good. Okay. So yeah, as I was saying, they're trying to go unidentified through there, but they can still get exploited, and they might not have the safer means of transportation, but that's where it might be taking place. And then ultimately, the last stage of vulnerabilities is here in the United States, as Sue well explained, that they can be exposed to various aspects, whether it is a sponsor or they're being coached, so they're not going to be answering things properly. They're undocumented. They need to send money back home to their family members and whatnot. So,
and the big one, they're told not to talk to authorities, right?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So so those are the 3 stages. So let's go to the next slide. Yeah, perfect. Okay, so in this slide, we wanted to go over something that's related to unaccompanied minors, and something that Sue was also addressing. When you're crossing the border, and she mentioned the Office of Refugee Resettlement, ORR, and they're in charge of their care, and they're looking for sponsors like family members or friends. And this slide, we wanted to show you what the releases have been between 2014 and 2020 in different states and different cities. And as you can see in the top, this is a list of the top cities in the country that have received unaccompanied minors and sponsors in particular. And you can see that these countries include in these cities, the top cities, you have 4 that are in Florida: Miami-Dade, Palm Beach, Lee County, and lastly, Broward. And aside from that, you can see the flow of youth that have been coming to the United States over the past 9 years. And you can see that in 2021, you have the highest numbers since 2014. So again, when Sue's talking about the potential sponsors that are involved, it's because there are also a lot of unaccompanied minors.
And this is Florida-specific data that we have coming up.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. So as you said, more specific to Florida, and you can see see that there was an increase in the state, only in the last 7 years, where it goes from close to 3,000. Now, in this past federal fiscal year, it was up to 13,000, close to it. So, so that's something that again provides context, right, to the unaccompanied minors.
Right.
So let's go to this next. Cool. Yeah. So another important factor when you're talking about these vulnerable youth is what services they might be eligible for, right? So this includes something called post-release services or home studies, which I'm sure that some of you on the call offer. And that's for youth to be living with their sponsor, the home studies are for when they're living with their sponsors, right?
So let me just add to that,
Sure.
because it's not home studies as we typically do within the DCF arena, right? It's not the same level of home study. It's more or less certain qualifications. They don't even come out and visit the home. It's rarely that they do, from what I've been told when I talk to them. Because when I go out to a house, or when one of our CPIs go out to a house and there's 10 people and 4 of them in one bedroom with this 12-year-old girl and the other 3 are adults, how would you allow that at a home study if it was DCF? So their criteria is a little bit different. And I think the point, Chris, you're going to go ahead and make, sorry to cut you off, but we got to be mindful of time as well.
Yeah, sure.
Look at the percentage of home studies compared to the actual kids released. So 55,960 kids released, 8,619 home studies were done.
Yeah. So there's that disparity.
It's just very few, very few.
Yeah.
And so this is specific to Florida too. You want to go ahead and talk about this as eligibility?
Yeah, absolutely. I gave some general numbers about certification eligibility numbers at a national level earlier, but here we can see in Florida what it's looking like. And as you can see in the past 6 years, there's been a significant increase as well, most notably between 2021 and 2022, that it goes from 83 to 178. And you can see that the youngest there was 9 years old, and the oldest was 75, that received the letters, again, mostly in 2022. And the main thing here also, so I'll be quick here, that there was the significant increase was with minors between 2021 and 2022, that went from 75 to 161. And we can try to assume why there was an increase, again, related to unaccompanied minors or whatnot, but I don't have concrete evidence, so I don't want to say that, but it is, you can see that there is a substantial increase between one year and next. So there you go, Sue.
Okay, so this is a video about an actual labor trafficking case with undocumented kids that worked in a chicken farm, and they had a nexus to Florida. So Florida also got involved. How much time do we have left, Robin?
Sorry, we've got 15 minutes until we have to end the program.
Okay, so we want to have at least some time for questions. Okay,
Yeah, about
we're going
10
to show
minutes
this
for
and then I'll
Q&A.
rush through the rest. Okay.
I'll put the link in the chat now, everybody, for what Sue is showing.
This is where the traffickers forced the Guatemalan teens to work off their debts.
Que no es fácil ganar $606 por semana y si esos $600 te quiten 550. No es fácil para una persona entonces.
This man says he worked with the teens at Trillium.
Cuando alguien ya no quería pagar o se quedaba sin querer pagar o decía querer protestar, entonces le llamaba a su familia. Vamos a quitar de tu tierra y todo su dinero que ha ganado o que él ya ha pagado se va a perder. O amenazaban de muerte. Muchas familias me dijeron a mí, muchos amigos me dijeron a mí que estaban amenazados de muerte, que iban a matar a su papá, a su mamá o uno de sus familiares si no quería pagar o no quería trabajar.
In October 2014, after 4 months at Trillium, one of the teens managed to call his uncle in Florida. The uncle agreed to talk to us, but was afraid to show his face on camera.
Y cuando mi sobrino me llamó, me dijo que al señor pues le había dicho a mi sobrino que si no cumples con tu deuda, a tu papá le voy a ir a dar unos 2 o 3 plomazos. Él estaba asustado y él estaba preocupado, llorándome a mí, llamándome que yo luchara yo por él. Entonces yo le dije que sí, yo voy a tratar la manera. Entonces yo tuve que hablar con el sheriff.
One day I received a phone call There was a gentleman that had a nephew that had been smuggled into the country from Guatemala and was being kept to work against his will in Ohio. And within 24 hours, I had a conference call from the head of the FBI, HSI, and the U.S. Attorney's Office in that region.
2 months later, federal and local law enforcement moved in.
A human trafficking bust at an egg farm in Maryland.
In the early morning hours, they raided the trailer park where the teens had been living.
Federal prosecutors call it modern-day slavery.
Their paychecks kept by their traffickers.
They detained approximately 45 people.
The human trafficking operation was run by a third-party contractor hired by Trillium Farms.
At least 10, they determined, were victims of trafficking, including 8 minors.
And the U.S. Attorney's Office says its investigation is ongoing.
I mean, how could that possibly happen? The more we learned about it, the more it became apparent that there was a connection back to our immigration policies and how the Department of Health and Human Services deals with kids who come here unaccompanied. What makes this Marion case even more alarming is that a U.S. government agency was actually responsible for delivering some of the victims into the hands of the abusers. How could the federal government take these kids in, try to protect them, and then as they send them out to families, you know, pending a court date, give them right back to the people who had brought them up here? Here's one of those homes. This is the trailer.
Senator Rob Portman was chairman of the committee that investigated the failures at the Department of Health and Human Services, the agency that released the boys to the traffickers in Ohio.
The more we learned, the more troubling it was from a federal perspective, because no one seemed to want to take responsibility for it.
What is everybody's doing is doing this. Out the door, we're done.
We've got these kids. They're here. They're living on our soil, and for us to just, you know, assume someone else is going to take care of them and throw them to the wolves, which is what HHS was doing, is flat out wrong. I don't care what you think about immigration policy. It's wrong.
The HHS division responsible for placing the teens declined to be interviewed. They told the committee they had strengthened their procedures to protect children. But the committee had found over a dozen other cases of trafficking related to the surge and said it's impossible to know just how many more victims there are.
It was not just the Ohio egg farm case. There were other cases in which multiple children were placed with sponsors in homes where they were subject to human trafficking, sexual abuse, and other severe forms of abuse and exploitation. More than 180,000 unaccompanied minors have been placed in communities across the country. But because there's so little follow-up with them once they're out of the government's care, we have no idea what's happened to them.
Okay, we want to try to quickly go back through this. So I'm going to talk briefly about forced criminality. You know, we don't often think about that. You know, kids are picked up for shoplifting, for selling drugs, for other things. And a lot of times it's related to trafficking, particularly sex trafficking. We've seen that. So is that a form of labor trafficking? It's something to think about because we're short of time. But this agency, anti-slavery, they also stated one distinct yet often under-identified characteristic of human trafficking is forced criminality. Traffickers may force adults and children to commit crimes in the course of their victimization, such as theft, illicit drug production, transport, prostitution, terrorism, and more. So we've seen that. We've seen drug sales. We've also seen cases where we had a child, it was actually a Romanian family, and she would send the child in to shoplift and then go back to another store, a different Walmart, for example, and return it for money. And this child was scared to death, was arrested, processed through DJJ, yet all of this was forced upon her. And it is a form of labor exploitation as well. We're going to rush through this though. And then on this also did a study, and it shows that individuals arrested only in relation to their trafficking are arrested 7 times more often than those who are arrested without any trafficking history. So kids, particularly, this is for adults and kids, and then we have where DJJ here in Florida did a study on our kids. But kids who have related trafficking charges are arrested much more often. I think I don't, yeah, here it is from DJJ. So if they were CSEC verified, they had an average of 7.5 arrests, and the non-CSEC verified children had an average of 4.9. So it's important to really look at that, to think about the forced criminality that's a part of trafficking. I'm not going to show this video. Ruth Rondon is the name of a survivor who created this e-learning series. And here she also talks about being forced to do shoplifting and other things. It's a great video if you have a chance to look at it. humantraffickingeLearning.com. They have different series on there. Some of them you have to pay for, but we're going to skip through this really quick. So really quick, smuggling versus trafficking. It's really important to point this out, and particularly with our undocumented kids too. A lot of people think any child that's been smuggled into the country is automatically a trafficking victim. We know the vulnerabilities are there, and they probably will become one maybe if they don't have the right support system around them. But human smuggling is a crime against a person, and I mean, is a crime against the country, I'm sorry, and trafficking is the crime against a person. So there is a difference, and they're not the same, but it doesn't mean that kids particularly and adults who are smuggled don't become victims of trafficking. This was that RTI study we talked about earlier. Again, compared to children who are subject of sex trafficking, those with labor trafficking allegations were younger. Median age was 15 versus 16. They were more likely to be male and less likely to have prior child welfare involvement. So again, we already talked about that before, that they're usually male victims as well. And they're also, their reports are either verified or not substantiated. We talked about that as well. So among kids who did have prior child welfare history, those with labor trafficking allegations had fewer prior allegations of all types. So if you look at the blue and the dark blue is labor and the lighter blue is sex trafficking. So if you compare that, the neglect, the physical abuse, sexual abuse, and psychological abuse, all of them was less for the labor trafficking victims as the sex trafficking victims for the ones who were with prior child welfare history. And it's important to look at too, you know, everyone says sexual abuse is the big precursor for sex trafficking. I know we're talking about labor trafficking here, but really it's the neglect that went with it, right? The neglect is the biggest indicator from all of these reports, a general neglect of the family for trafficking. The similarities with the domestic victim compared to a non-domestic victim, right? Both have psychological abuses, beatings, burning, sexual abuse, starvation, isolation, drug and alcohol dependency. And then the ones who are undocumented, there's threats of deportation, threats against the victim's family members, withholding of documents, debt, and not as much branding or tattoos as seen among undocumented youth as well. You want to talk about this really quick, Chris, and then we're going to have to close it up because we're running out of time. We want them to ask questions.
I was going to say, maybe we just leave it up for questions. I know we got 5 minutes left, and you know, we apologize for not being able to get through it all. But Robin, I don't know if there were some questions you specifically wanted to go over.
Yeah, first of all, thank you. I am writing so many notes down. I've learned so much from you both, and I feel like we could go another hour. But let's do this. A couple of the questions involve people wanting to know what to do if they see something. So if they see door-to-door sales of youth, can you just talk, or if they see something suspicious at a salon next to them with men coming and going, what should they do? Can you talk a little bit about the responses people should take?
So for minors, I will talk about the minors first. So if you have any indication or suspicion that a minor is being a victim of trafficking, or traveling sales crews or whatever it might be, you want to try to be able to get some type of identity of that child or someplace where someone can respond to. Just calling the hotline, say, I saw this, and there's no location for someone to respond to, it won't be taken. So now with the traveling sales crews, they're actually wear name badges. If you see them, most of them have like little clipped onto their shirts. So if you can just kind of take a picture of that or ask the child what school they go to in casual conversation, because if we know the name of the school and the first name of, the name of the child, then that's a place we can respond to too. Definitely call DCF Abuse Hotline if you have any suspicion, if you have a place for a CPI to respond to, much quicker than calling Polaris. Now with adults, you can call Polaris. If it's an immediate situation that someone's in harm, I would call law enforcement immediately. But if it's something, right. But if you're suspicious something's going on, don't really know, you can always call Polaris on adults. But for children, please call DCF hotline because there's a delay in the reports from Polaris to us. And plus, when someone's calling the DCF hotline, that counselor on the other line, on the end of the phone, knows the questions to ask to get that report taken. A lot of times people call Polaris and they just record what they said, and it's not enough information. Doesn't mean they didn't have it. They just didn't give us enough information to take that report.
And sometimes too, what we see is that the national hotline, there may be a delay, but I'm gonna, the number is 888-373-7888. Also look in your local area. If you do have a task force, someone in our area could call us and we could talk through them. We're a warm line, not a hotline, but
FDLE just put up a hotline too for this, for Florida. I don't know it by heart. We're gonna have to put that in our next PowerPoint, but if you can look that up, Robin, FDLE now has a report, has a hotline number.
Yeah, okay, I will do it. Okay, so we had other questions here. Let me go back to this. If a parent makes their children work in a family business for more than 3 hours, is that legal?
That is legal. So a child that works for the parent, it does not follow labor laws.
Okay.
Now, if they're neglecting the child in other ways, not letting the child go to school, abusing the child, other issues, that's those issues and those reports can be called in, but that will not be labor trafficking.
Okay, great. I think
can I add something?
Yeah,
quick
please.
Here? No, it's just that, it's something to add to what Sue was saying before, is that understanding the difference between child labor, child exploitation, and child labor trafficking. That's very important. And maybe, I don't know, Robin, if at some point we can have a follow-up discussion about that, because that is very important to know, like chores at the house versus, working for family business versus working an additional amount of hours during school days, whatever, like all those nuances are very important to understand when identifying cases. And you can't just assume that because they're working, it's they're being exploited. Right. So I just wanted to add to that we needed to clarify it.
Yes, absolutely. Sue, when you were talking about the forced criminality, someone said, is that usually referred to as victim provocation? I've not heard that.
I have not heard that either. So I can't answer that. I want to Google it now. Is it?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, exactly.
Sounds like you're provoking the child to do something, but I think there's more force, there's a lot of force and coercion in that as well.
Well, and I also want to mention that our program next third Friday in September is with Brent Woody, who is an expert on expungement of trafficking related arrests and prosecutions, essentially clearing the criminal record of anybody who commits a crime during the time that they're trafficked. So to your point about forced criminality, I think it's far too common is what we've seen it happen. It maybe the defense counsel hasn't brought it up. Who knows why this happens? But yes, thank you, Judge Tepper. Brent is brilliant. And I think you all should make sure you attend next month as well, because this is one of those issues that really does need to keep in the front of our heads when we're talking about this issue, because it is so unfortunately common. We are 1 minute to go, and I will ask my friends, my presenters here, Chris, if you've looked online, what do you believe would be the most beneficial law that could be passed to prevent or greatly diminish human and I guess that means sex and labor trafficking? I would say if we could eliminate poverty, that would be a big step in the right direction. Immigration reform, I think housing, if we had universal housing and if we had access to good jobs, that's what I would like to see happen.
And more substance abuse treatment.
And also something that's specific to a law, just to be, I'll be very quick here, is that there are quite a few challenges when it comes to, say, when you're sponsoring somebody to come into the United States, that you have to, if you sponsor their visa, they have to stay working with you. So there's that tie right to them. So that's a loophole right now that is something that I would also think that can get addressed.
Especially if they're exploiting them, they would want to get away.
Right. Correct. Yes, that's right.
Yes. Okay, great. Yeah, I mean, that's another, we did get a request for part 2 to this. I'll just give you all that prompt that we would love to do that again.
That's great. For sure.
And I think that there's so much more to say. There's a quick question: if a parent has enrolled a minor in a community dance group that travels, is a work permit needed? I don't think so.
Yes, I think
you think so?
If it's, say it again, and what
Yeah,
type of group?
parent has enrolled a minor in a community dance group that travels. Is a work permit needed?
I'm not a lawyer, but community dance group should be registered. As a parent, I wouldn't allow my child to go with someone who's not registered with SunBiz. And if it's an organization that's registered, they should be following the labor laws, which requires that permit.
And this question came from a wonderful STAC board member, Cassie Hammock. Hello, Cassie. And I will be happy to follow up with you on this later if you have any questions. So good to have board members.
I have a good contact, Department of Business Professional Regulations, where I could call and ask that question. But I mean, it depends how we're defining community dance group.
Okay, I'll follow up with you, Sue. Thank you. You know, this was a lot of information for us to digest. You have many thank yous and kudos in the chat to you both. I want to thank you both for your time and all your work. I'm blown away by the statistical information, and I think that we do need to go into great detail about it, getting the or figure out how we can get the word out about the prevalence of this. And Sue, I was going to ask you about the vast underreporting of child labor when you were given the DCF stats. We know there's a lot more, and it's just not coming forward. And how do we get organizations like STAC on the ground, people and the IRC and others that we're working with to start to raise the awareness of this issue? I think that might be something we can.
And I think it's something that we talked about before. Everyone's focused on CSAC and not labor. So even like your school prevention programs, did that include labor? You know, all of these organizations that are doing prevention trainings and programs, it's usually focused on sextortion, you know, and sex trafficking. And we really need to get labor in there as well.
Absolutely. And that's true for the adult population as well, vulnerable adults as well. Labor trafficking is happening, and it's happening, you know, in concert with sex trafficking also. So we're going to say thank you and see you next time.